Yeah, this is definitely the VIP group, which I'm really excited about. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us this morning for what we're hoping will be a very good conversation, but also just as we're seeing a super fun reunion of, folks who we've been actively engaged with in the past, but haven't seen a lot of recently. So really, just really good to see everybody here. You'll see some instructions here on the screen just to help you navigate the WebEx a little bit. We know most folks are used to Zoom, but you'll see there's a little chat bubble at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to chat comments or questions into the chat box. If you haven't already, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. What's your name and what organization are you representing? As we go, it would be great if everybody could stay on mute. If not, we can mute you. We have the power. Big Brother will mute you if you need to. And it's a pretty small group, but you also have the option here of turning off your camera if you prefer not to be on camera. And sometimes that helps with bandwidth and things too. So feel free to do that. Go ahead, Alice, and we'll jump right in. So, like I said, welcome to our event. I think everybody here knows JFF, but for those who don't, we're a 35 plus year old organization, national organization, headquartered in Boston. But we've been out, have a satellite office in the Bay Area since 2015-ish. And we're working on strategies that help to align, transform, and reimagine the American workforce and education systems. And we do that primarily with partners like you out in the field. So like I said, we're very happy to have you here with us this morning. Hi, Kim is here. Hi, Kim. So I'm Renee Faulkner. I'm an associate director in the Inclusive Regional Economic Development Unit that's based here in the Bay Area. I'm joined by our colleagues, Joel Vargas, a program vice president, our senior director and unit lead, Ana Gutierrez, and our program manager, Alice Rice. Everybody wave. So we've got a pretty straightforward agenda here for you. I think because we're a smaller group, we'll be able to let this be a little more conversationally. Joel was saying as we were planning this, if we were in person, this would be more of like a roundtable conversation. So we'll imagine the virtual roundtable here. So we'll start with kind of going back to 2014-ish and reviewing some of those, the goals and outcomes of those big regional initiatives that many of you participated in as they in your efforts to expand career pathways through regional partnerships, and talk about what it meant to shift from some of the older notions of regional to some of the more systems-minded notions of regionalism. After that, we've got a great panel conversation planned to talk about how some of these regional partnerships are being tested now in the context of the pandemic and the resulting economic downturn, and get a sense from leaders who are on the front lines of how they're responding. And then finally, we'll kind of wrap things up with some updates about JFF's Future Ready California Network, some things that we have in store for you and how you can get involved. And as I was saying throughout, if there are any times where you've got comments or questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll see if we can carve out some space for those. Good. So getting started, you'll all remember the significant investments that there we go, happened in the state between 2014 and 2018. We saw hundreds of millions of dollars, public and private, invested in regional partnerships and career pathways initiatives. Some examples are here on the slide. We saw CCPT, which in and of itself was a $500 million investment from the state. So California community colleges invest in the Doing What Matters Strong Workforce initiative, and also some private investment, for instance, Irvine Foundation's Link Learning Hubs of Excellence work. So most of these programs, as you know, had a goal of expanding existing or developing new partnerships between K-12 schools and districts, 2- and 4-year colleges, workforce, and industry. And most were explicitly focused on expanding career pathways and CTE. So some of you may know that JFF came to California with the express purpose of supporting the state and regions in its CCPT efforts. And we also served as the intermediary for Irvine's Link Learning Hubs of Excellence initiative. So Joel, I might ask you to comment a little bit on kind of what brought us here, since you were kind of the inaugural member of our California team. What brought us here, and from your memory, kind of what was the state trying to do with these types of investments?
Yeah, taking me back, Renee, taking us all back. It was also rational, right? If you're gonna, if states and private funders, which they did at the time, wanted to implement and expand pathways that aligned, in some cases, like integrated K-12 post-secondary curricula, and really made sure that that was aligned to employer demand for skills and opportunities for work-based learning, then it made sense. I still think it does, to operate at a regional level, as kind of the primary unit of change, and cooperation and coordination. So, and that's because, labor markets are regional. Public colleges, for the most part, have regional reach, in a catchment area. We could probably name all sorts of other reasons that made a lot of sense. So, in a sense, coming in, it was like, it's a way to get things done, to build conditions for sustainability as well and continued growth by showing how pathways and the partnerships that were needed to develop them, like, created this kind of better, this equilibrium between supply and demand for talent in the labor market in regions. So, when we came, I mean, I have to admit, that was my mental model coming in. And we had, JFF had long experience over the years in supporting different waves of development of career pathways nationally, and in so doing, supporting cross-sector partnerships. But California at the time, I mean, it really was the largest set. I mean, I can't even think of another one subsequently. It really was the largest set of investments in any given place to advance pathways, and our role was to advise the funders, whether they were, public or private, about the design of the initiatives, provide technical assistance to selected regions, and to document the learning. So without going into depth here, because I'm painting outside the boundaries of the question you asked, I mean, I think we pretty quickly learned from all the people on the call here that the important work wasn't just about the transactional stuff, to achieve the goals of these particular projects and initiatives. Like, where the action was at, and where there was a lot of emotion and politics and the real hard work, was just around building capacity among leaders within regions, building capacity, building relationships, trust, to do the kinds of systems changes for partnership that would create the more enduring conditions and coalitions that are needed to achieve long-term change beyond the short horizon of any, like, no matter how big, whatever grant program of the era, to sort of really set a gaze on a longer term shared mission and vision. So that became more of the work, and where we placed an emphasis, versus, not to take away from the importance of the transactional work and hitting the numbers and all that, but I think it's fair to say we started to shift our focus halfway in to supporting some of those more enduring kinds of conditions.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And I might ask, I mean, I know we've got a lot of experts here on the call, but does anyone else want to share kind of what they remember about, when these initiatives launched, or what they remember about what the intention of these initiatives were, and how that was back in 2014, 15?
Well, I'm happy to jump in.
Hey, Kim.
Hey, it's good to see you. Just listening to this and then just looking at this simple list on the screen and thinking back to 2014. Wow. I think what's exciting to me is that when I look at that, a lot of great work happened and has taken root and is continuing to expand. And when I look at the folks that are on this call, just to see the things that I know of that are happening in their regions really, points to the fact that this is important work, and that there is great value in connecting the different partners and sharing ideas and resources to sort of link and leverage where we head. So it's fun to think back a bunch of years and see how far we've come, even though there's still much to be done. But, it's exciting to have been a part of all of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that was done. And we were having a little bit of this conversation internally this week as we kind of reflected on some of these things as well. And I think it was Anna mentioned something like, oh, it's like what's old is new again. Like it feels like there's a renewed need and desire and urgency around these partnerships again. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Diane, did you want to add anything?
Thanks, Renee. Not really, just I thought that was a very good, concise overview of what had so many moving parts and continues to do a real transformation of mindset and action in small steps, but that has that growing and continuing momentum. So I appreciated what Joel had to say.
Thank you. Awesome. If we could go to the next slide, Alice, and look a little bit at some of what we saw as some of the outcomes. Is it going? Oh, did you switch to the outcome slide? I think it's the next one. Yeah, there we go. Just a little bit of what we saw. So we did some research around the end of CCPT in 2018 and kind of drew some conclusions about what happened, at least at the end of phase 1 of CCPT. But I think a lot of these outcomes are probably transferable across the different types of regional initiatives. And of course, if you want to see this report, it's on our website. But some of the things that we found were among CCPT grantees anyway, just about all of them developed new or expanded career pathways or deepened existing pathways. Most grantees who we interviewed for that research reported there was an increase in student pathway participation and in CTE coursework. Across the board, there were a lot of new community college partnerships that were built, and oftentimes those partnerships yielded other outcomes, including like new dual enrollment partnerships or new articulation agreements that enabled pathway students to earn college credit. We also saw that through the expanded work-based learning opportunities and linked learning opportunities, students had greater relevance in their education, and therefore we saw decreases in high school dropouts among pathway students. So a lot of positive outcomes that came out of the regional work, or in this case specifically the CCPT work. That said, when it came to sustainability, there was a little more mixed. As Joel was describing, so the intention was really that CCPT in particular would stimulate new ways of motivating and supporting high school students, that it would foster new local and regional relationships, and that ideally, grantees would see career pathways sustained by these newly established collaborations among schools and districts and colleges and employers at the local and the regional levels. And I think there was also an intention that, again, ideally the resources and the staff that was necessary for CCPT and the cross-sector work would transition from, grant funded, special funded status to really become an established part of partners' budgets. That said, I think after 3 or 4 years of the CCPT funding, our research suggested that few, if any, of the 40-ish round one CCPT consortia actually achieved sustainability in those very ideal types of terms. So there was a lot of, to Jules' earlier point around transactions, there was a lot that came out of the transactional pieces, but there was still a lot of work to do around the building infrastructure and creating sustainable systems. So if, Alice, if you could go to the regionalism slide. Oops. Thanks. So this was also from our learning from our work with regional partners, through our engagement in the field. We learned that through partners work, leaders were developing a new concept of regional partnership that, we kind of dubbed regionalism, not that it was a new term by any stretch of the imagination, but it was something we sort of operationalized for ourselves. But, whereas previous efforts defined regions by a certain geography, what we were seeing in these kind of new configurations where the work was asking leaders to take on a more networked approach. And whereas many previous efforts were based on one-on-one partnerships, or were really based in like individual relationships between individual people, but leaders are really seeing that in order for these efforts to be sustainable, leaders needed to build long-lasting infrastructure and really develop new ways of working together that weren't so reliant on individual relationships. Earlier efforts, we learned, were really focused on meeting grant outcomes, or as folks like to say, checking the boxes or chasing the grant dollars. We heard that a lot. But these leaders were really thinking about the longer term systems changes that were designed for sustainability once grants ended. So I think now we're actually going to hear from some of these leaders who were doing this challenging work from regional to regionalism. We've got, or maybe I'll pause for a second. Any thoughts in the chat? Oh, interesting, Deborah. Just reading comments. Yeah, follow along in the comments. These are super interesting. I don't know, Deborah, Ann, do you want to add anything?
Just to say, I find it so intriguing how all kinds of things started in dots and silos, and now the opportunity as more people's minds have literally changed. And I think the JFF folks that have been working with Fresno know we literally hit bottom in '93. And the humility that came from that allowed people to learn a new approach. And as a Minnesotan who came here, to me, it feels like our civic DNA has been transmuted into community-centric from Wild Wild West and survival of the fittest. So I guess I'm testament to say it's possible to transform from the inside out if it gets bad enough.
Yeah. Love that. Really good point. Also, I'm a Minnesotan. I didn't know you were a Minnesotan. I'm a Minnesotan too.
Where?
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis. Okay.
Yep.
I consider myself Twin Cities, lived in both.
There we go. Good. Lots of connections to be made on this call. Great. So, okay, let's go ahead and turn to our panel. Yes, that's right. We have another Minnesotan on the call, Sarah Hooker on our team. But brought together a few folks who were really outstanding leaders in a lot of these initiatives over the last several years, and who we thought could really lend some interesting perspective on what this work looked like for them and what it's looking like now as we're addressing some new and different type of challenges. So what we have here is we've got Deb Mustaine, the Executive Director of Economic Development and Entrepreneurship at Riverside Community College District. We also work closely with Deb as one of our Link Learning Hubs of Excellence partners. We've got Dr. Robert Pimentel, Vice President of Educational Services and Institutional Effectiveness at Fresno City College, who's been deeply involved in the Fresno Drive regional work. We've got Rock Pfotenhauer, the chair of the Bay Area Community College Consortium through the Strong Workforce Program, and Joy Soares, the Director of College and Career at the Tulare County Office of Education, who's been deeply involved in both the hub work, CCPT work, and others. So let's turn it over to the panel. We will start with, I think I'll start with Joy. So Joy, as I was saying, you've been deeply involved in a number of regional initiatives in the Tulare Kings region for several years. And at the end of 2018, you had helped transform your cross-sector partnerships from what you had called a grant-funded consortia to a regional partnership called the Tulare Kings College and Career Collaborative. So could you talk a little bit about what systems you put in place in order to make that transition from, what was a regional partnership to, or what was just like a grant-funded partnership to a regional collaborative?
Sure. Yeah, it's just great to be here and to the opportunity to be involved in this conversation, just to network and learn with others who value the regionalism and the power of partnerships. And it's great to see so many familiar faces on the line. And, I wanted to start out today by just saying, having our Tulare Kings College and Career Collaborative be a regional partnership rather than a grant-funded consortia, for our partners to depend upon these past 11 months of the COVID-19 pandemic has really proved to be really pivotal, because they were seeking solutions and really innovative new ways to work. And, it's been something that has really excited people about the opportunities that we've had and that we'll continue to have. And it's been super important. So just to, really think about that statement, Renee, a grant-funded consortia to a regional partnership, it sort of harkens back to that slide you had up, In 2014, high school partners in Tulare and Kings counties, with letters of support from, some of the community colleges and a few key industry partners, we applied and received, $15 million CCPT1 grant. And then the next year, it was followed by a $6 million CCPT2 grant. And this grant-funded consortium was named the Tulare Kings Linked Learning Consortium. And, in our first 4 years of work, we really created this cross-sector communication with K-12, post-secondary, and industry. It was really somewhat programmatic in a way. It was loosely structured, and we began, to solve problems and to see some improvement together. And partners really started to rely on that. Excuse me for a minute. So when the CCPT funding dried up, the Tulare Kings Link Learning Consortium's existence, it was really threatened. It was threatened, we thought, because there was a lack of funding to support the convener, which was the Tulare County Office of Education. However, because partners had become to rely on not the Tulare County Office of Education, but all of the other, the community colleges, the WIBs, each other, and K-12, champions and advocates from across the region came together And we really did form a regional partnership collaborative. It was self-funded by the partners for about 2 years until the partnership expanded. And, you know, we were able to attract some technical assistance and some additional funding support. Jobs for the Future was extremely important to not only the coaching aspect, the technical assistance aspect, also in connecting us with others who are on the line that we were able to learn from. Jobs for the Future, West Ed, Gates, K-12 Strong Workforce, and then CTIG, Southern California Edison, some private funders really helped come together and support this regional collaborative. And, you know, when partners came together, we really talked about the things that Joel talked about: long-term change, trust, you know, vision. And what I loved about it, it was about a strong regional economic future. And, you know, I'm one person, a director with a title that really is just someone who helps convene with so many other leaders in our partnership. This is truly a collaborative, and we really do focus on our 3 core beliefs. All students must be ready to succeed when they transition to post-secondary education, career training, in the workforce. You know, we believe that linked learning and high quality pathways are strategies to further develop a skilled talent pipeline. And we also believe that we're better together. And so this cross-sector work has definitely been very messy, yet we are focused on metrics that matter. We have Tulare King's College and Career Collaborative metrics, and they're really about equity and access for all students. For example, you know, increased early college credit, obtaining an industry certification. Those are the kinds of things that our system's horizontal and vertical infrastructure of networks and work groups has helped us move the work forward together toward these outcomes. So Renee, you asked about the intentional, well, you asked about kind of our infrastructure and how's it holding up.
Yeah, how is it holding? I was thinking about, I mean, it was helpful how you sort of mapped out the different parts of that infrastructure. But earlier you mentioned it's messy and there are a lot of challenges right now in this new context. So how are some of those systems holding up?
Sure. I think that because the partners created together a very intentional and purposeful infrastructure that involves, you know, the presidents, the superintendents, the workforce leaders, and then we also have dean and directors, and we have teachers and from all over the system. It's because they were intentional. I think it allowed for some scaling and some sustainability over the past 7 years. I mean, it's messy in places. We've experienced some setbacks. However, despite the struggles, we've broken some barriers that were there, you know, even as early as 5 years ago. Our communication with our community college partners has significantly increased due to the efforts of some very important team members in the system. During the pandemic, our infrastructure really remained strong. The cross-sector participation in our networks and our work groups and our student events, our improvement teams, it's been really high. You know, we were concerned, what's going to happen? Who's going to show up? Why would they come? And our partners shared with us that they came to the table because they were looking for support. You know, they wanted this collective solutions idea because they had common concerns about learning, about skill building, about readiness for the workforce. We've heard from our partners around the state, and I'm sure many of you on the call, that our K-12 partners are sharing that in our linked learning and CTE pathway courses, they're having higher student attendance because of the relevancy and the support found in the smaller learning communities. And that's really exciting to, it's an equity issue for sure. And it's exciting to know how really these linked learning and pathway approaches have changed our high schools. So the fact remains though, and as I wrap up, you know, there's been a significant lack of student engagement and a high student course fail rate in our region that's resulted in a deep learning loss for the majority of our youth. And we read about that and learn about that all over the state, right? And mental health of our students and our parents and our community members, it's really at the forefront of our concerns. So we continue to be concerned about the Equity and Access Grant and what this will mean for us moving forward. Just this past Monday, our senior leaders shared that these concerns make regional support even more important to our entire community. And so I'm glad that the Tulare Kings College and Career Collaborative is available and there to support.
Yeah, that's great, Joy. Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to hear some examples of how regional partners are coming together around, content that's not about pathways, right? That's about mental health or supporting community members in different ways given the current challenges. Yeah.
Certainly, we've seen our meeting shift. We've seen the conversation shift. We start conversations off about, what's going on, share with us, how can we help, what do we need to know? And it's been really, really helpful.
So Deb, would love your perspective on this. You've had professional roles and done quite a bit of research across kind of the education, economic development spectrum, such that you're really able to look at cross-sector partnerships from different vantage points now. So kind of given your holistic perspective, how will cross-sector partners need to work together differently to address the current economic challenges, but perhaps also some of the other examples that Joy was sharing around, students' mental health and, community members' varying needs?
Sure. So Joel and Joy both highlighted things that I think were really important in the comments that I wanted to make. And so I'll probably be reinforcing some of the things that we've already talked about this morning, but I think there are three things we need to be thinking about right now. One is reflection. It's a great time to reflect. And of course, my dog has decided this is the time to bark. Sorry about that. Second is to ask questions. And third is to really listen to what's going on, including dogs barking. So first of all, sorry, I need to take care of this. Just a minute, I'll be back.
We'll pause there. This is life from working from home. But maybe we'll come back to Deb because I would like to hear, what she has to say on those 3 points. But maybe we'll shift for a second. Oh,
sorry about that.
Is the dog okay?
So I just wanted to make a few points around this, and this is based on a lot of the research that I did as well as my experience. I did a national study, 72 qualitative interviews of people working in cross-sector pathways. So looking at what are those behaviors, what are the things we need to do to be successful. So again, reflecting, asking questions, and listening are the things that I want to focus on today. The first one is really reflecting on how you're working together now. So my first question when I did my research is, where did you learn to collaborate? And a lot of times what we're talking about is not actual collaboration, it's cooperation, compliance, forced cooperation, which we see a lot of times in those grant applications, right? Oh, we need to bring these partners to the table, but are they legitimate partners? Are they partners because we need someone to check that box? So really taking an honest look at the current state of your cross-sector partnership and where you can improve to the point that it feels like a true partnership collaboration. And it's not just a give and take. I think Joel alluded to the transactional nature of some of the things that we do. Joy alluded to the programmatic way we tend to focus. So I think reflecting on how that partnership is a true partnership, collaborative in nature, and really moving transformationally to change the systems that we're looking to change. The second thing I wanted to say is that we need to recognize that collaboration in our partnerships is developmental. So it's like building a muscle. And a lot of times people get frustrated because it's like, well, they're not a very good collaborative partner. Well, maybe they've never done it. Maybe they bring other, mindsets to the table that are not necessarily helpful, and it will take time to develop that muscle, both individually and collectively in collaboration. So thinking about where everybody is and recognizing that everybody comes to this at a different developmental place, and how do we help everybody move forward to make that collaboration successful? And again, getting to that transformation, that larger change that we want to get to. The third is and this one, Joy and I were part of the Carnegie Foundation work with the Gates Foundation a few years ago, and this has really stuck with me, to deeply understand the problem you're trying to solve. We all want to jump to solution really quickly when we're looking at, improving educational systems, addressing students' mental health. It's like, hey, I have an answer. And we run with that answer before we deeply understand the problem that we're trying to solve. So I would say practicing that intellectual curiosity of listening and really deeply understanding what you're trying to solve is key to all of this. Also, in that vein, allowing for both risk and failure in an iterative process. So, so many times we come up with what we think is the solution. And I'll say my region was a great example of that. There were people who were part of the Link Learning Initiative, and the minute that it became challenging, it was like, oh, that's failure. We need to move on to something else. Well, maybe not so, but you have to have the ability to practice, fail, get better, learn from those things, go back and what were we trying to solve? Were we moving in the right direction? So finally, and most importantly to me, equity is at the foundation of all of this. And as much as we've been talking about equity, particularly in the past year, I'm still not convinced that we've done a good enough job of looking at equity as the true foundation for all the transformational work that we're trying to achieve. And so going back and looking at our collaboratives and saying, how are we addressing equity in a meaningful way? Are the people that we're trying to serve meaningfully engaged in the efforts that we have going on? Are we hearing from them? Are they sitting at the same tables as we're sitting at? Are they giving feedback? And are they really able to speak into what's being created that is reflective of their community? So I would say equity is foundational. If you haven't really addressed equity, I think it's impossible to get to transformation that helps the folks that you want to help. And along with that is that moral purpose. A lot of times people come to the table with different ideas about why they're at the table, but if you haven't defined that moral purpose really centered in equity, it's hard to make this work, because as Joy said, and I think Joel alluded to as well, this is messy, hard work. It's the hardest work I've ever done. It's the best work I've ever done. But it is not for the faint of heart. It goes beyond all of those grant cycles, election cycles, all of those things. This is a long haul process, and having that moral purpose and clarity together is key.
Yeah, huge. And it is so hard, and it's so messy, and it's definitely, it always sounds good when we talk about it. We always ran into this at JFF too, like, oh, just, work as a network, like easy peasy, but it's not that easy. But in your sort of day-to-day work, or even in your research, have you seen any examples of partners who, who are really digging in deep to some of the points you made around this authentic collaboration, or taking the time to reflect, or really trying to understand the problem, and kind of what, in real life, what has it looked like?
Actually, I'm in the process of working a real life example now. And it's interesting because even with that, we're starting a new collaborative effort. And, we started out and we started making the same mistakes that I've made before. And I went, wait a minute, I did some research on this. And as a matter of fact, there's some good ideas in that research. So, I know that Kim McNulty out at One Future Coachella Valley, Kim's got long, deep collaborative work that I would point to. I would say that all of us are learning about and getting better at collaboration. But for me, one of the main things, looking at that equity lens, is I am engaging right away with the folks at the Black Workers Center to bring them to the table to help us understand, those issues that are causing our Black and Brown folks in our region to not be able to get out of that long-term multi-generational poverty cycle. So those are just a couple of things that are happening in our region. I know Kim is doing a phenomenal job out in Coachella Valley, which also has some really tough conditions and folks that they're trying to serve.
Awesome, thank you. Maybe we'll turn to Rock now, who's got a perspective here from the strong workforce. So Rock, you're the regional chair of a strong workforce consortium, a particularly large and complex consortium, here in the Bay Area. I want to ask you a couple questions around some of the challenges you're seeing in the Bay Area that could benefit from regional partnership and regional leadership. But also Rock wants to share with us some interesting slides. So Alice, if you could share.
Actually the conversation that we've been having just is terrific, and I'm eager to dive into this more than probably we will have time for today. We are part of these incredibly large systems. The community college system in California is the largest post-secondary system in the country. Yet we get very little benefit of that scale. And how do we do that? Why aren't we taking advantage of that scale? So we've been thinking about this a lot in the Bay region, and this is work that I've been engaged in for probably, 10 or 15 years. And this is a model that we have been sort of hit upon by accident, and I would like to explain it and how we've utilized this model in this pandemic. And the idea is, how we've talked about the value of collaboration and how do we get people to do that. And we used to think about it in terms of like an image that sort of resonated with me as a guy holding a sign on the Brooklyn Bridge saying something like, the world is about to end. We've got to do something about it. And over time, I began to think that that really wasn't the way in which people got motivated to do something. And began to think of our system as an underdeveloped economy in a lot of ways, that we had lots of assets that weren't being combined productively. And the question is, how do you get different different entities that would benefit so much by collaborating, by sharing resources, by sharing particularly sort of complementary resources to do that? And a mechanism that is often used in developing economies and in economies in general is marketplaces, where you bring people together who have similar interests, who can see in a fairly efficient way what each other's assets are and how they might benefit by combining them. And that's the approach that we've taken in the Bay region. So it's sort of moving from this image of people trying to do things that they are very difficult to do, sort of college by college, to this next image of, how do you bring people together to tackle something that you can't move on your own. And what we found is that sometimes if you do this right, you get to this third image here, where you actually can move something. Not to say that there aren't some casualties along the way, but what we've actually found that when we bring people together in this process of identifying, and maybe we can go to the next slide, what we found is that when we bring people together around the table and we ask people to talk about sort of not what you think we ought to be doing together, but what is it that you need? And through that kind of structured conversation, we start finding, there are intersections here where people say, hey, you need that, I need that, we ought to do this together because we could probably be more effective. And so when we've done this often in a in a real-time, in real life kind of format where we're bringing people together around a table like this. And the pandemic obviously didn't allow that. So it forced us to do more of this online. And I think we found things that were advantageous about that. And we have developed some tools that I'm going to just quickly run through. invite you to explore these and there won't be time to even demo them today, but if there is interest and if something of this appeals to you, let me know. So if we could go to the next slide. One of the things that we began doing shortly after we got into the pandemic was convening these regional calls on a bi-weekly basis, where we just got people on the phone on a Zoom call and started, saying, what's going on? What should we be thinking about? What's happening here? That moved to part of that was we had then some sub-regional calls. And one tool I want to highlight that we used is Group Mind, and you could go to that and just get a sense of what that is. But it is a tool that allows people in a meeting, sort of in real time, to just start typing in their ideas. And it's a great way to just very quickly capture lots of different ideas, and then you can move that into a kind of prioritization phase and so on. It's a tool we hit upon through a chance encounter that's been used with large groups of people. We're still learning how to use it, but it has been an effective way to get sort of large-scale participation in these large meetings and to begin doing some synthesis of that. One thing we found in this marketplace approach is that it's critical that you get sort of, the more narrow your focus is, the more productive the marketplace is, because people then begin to really see, oh, I do have a connection here with somebody. We've got similar interests. Through this sort of process, we've started to evolve to 4 areas of focus. One of those is how do we adapt instruction in the era of the pandemic with a particular emphasis on equity? How do we make sure that people who have difficult time getting online are able to get online? The second was K-14 pathways. Lots of research about the impact on young people entering the labor market, a lifetime hit on their earnings. We've got to make these K-14 pathways work. Third was adult pathways, particularly for dislocated workers. And then the fourth, which really is embedded in all those other 3, was equity. But we said, okay, let's now start convening these groups of people in a more focused way. So we now are having bi-weekly K-14 pathway calls. We're having monthly calls of that are focused on adult pathways. So in the K-14 pathways, we've got K-12 community colleges and other organizations supporting that. And then on the adult pathways, it's workforce development boards, adult eds, community colleges. And we're getting great attendance on these. 60 to 100 people are joining in. But one of the sort of challenges here is that you've got all these people to get these kind of partnerships going. The marketplace is a place where you get the partnerships sort of launched. One of the things we developed, this is priorities.baccc.net, so I invite you to go there as well. But we started posting on that the ideas that came up, and then inviting people to comment on it, to note if they were interested and put their contact information and sort of their institution's interest in it. Partly to then sort of see what was of priority, but also to help people start connecting with each other, so that they say, you're interested in that, I'm interested in that, why don't we work together? And then the third element of this is how do we then start resourcing these? So we have something we call regional joint ventures. Out of our strong workforce funds, we set aside some funds that are available to support sort of projects that emerge. So out of these sort of other steps here, people begin to say, let's work together on this, and they can post an idea on this rjv.baccc.net. Just sometimes it's just a very rough sketch of, here's an issue I'm interested in tackling. And that evolves over time to people saying, I want to work on that too. Let's join together and get some funding for this. So we've got probably over the last 3 or 4 years, 30 or 40 projects that are being funded that are collaborative efforts that have been resourced by this $2.5 million that we have each year. But actually we are finding that more money is being put into those by colleges directly investing because they see the value of that kind of collaboration.
Interesting. Are you noticing, Rock, the areas or the needs in which people want to connect? Has there been a shift in the type of needs or the type of areas in which people want to connect this year, given the pandemic?
Sure. Yeah, two quick examples. One of the things that we started doing was convening communities of practice among faculty who had been suddenly forced to move their courses online, and many of whom in CTE were totally unprepared for that. So one example was culinary arts. Doing that, not being able to get to a kitchen is hard, and brought faculty together. Most of them had never done anything online before, but a few had. So that they started sharing what worked and what didn't work, but they also started looking around to identify, are there other sort of platforms that are delivering content that would be useful to us in a video format, online format? And they found something that they all said, this really is high quality, we'd like it. They went off to the vendor of that and cut a deal that the vendor was not serving this market at all, but cut a deal that K-12 and colleges are participating in. It's a much reduced rate from what the normal thing is. Faculty are really quite happy with it, and we've had other regions join in on it. Another quick example is we know that workforce development boards are looking for short-term instruction. We have colleges that are eager to do that. One of our regional directors looking at labor market research identified, here's a set of skills. One of them around, there are a huge number of first-level supervisory positions across the region in all kinds of industries, and really not much instruction that is available for that. And those positions are still in demand. There's still training required for that. So we brought faculty from across the region who were particularly interested in that to say, let's put together some curriculum that is short-term that would meet that particular need. And we would be able to do that in online format, so we're not restricted to doing it just within our own districts. And let's make that available to workforce development boards who might be looking for that. So we're at a point now where we've got that curriculum in place, we've got the courses scheduled, and actually where we're struggling with is getting that connection with the workforce development boards. So there's a meeting with, we've got a contact in EDT, they've facilitated a connection with CWA, and we're hoping to do sort of a regional scale pilot where we're working with the workforce development boards to identify what their needs are that we could deliver through our credit-based, non-credit-based instruction that wouldn't cost them anything and allows them to better utilize their resources for support of students rather than covering cost of instruction.
Yeah, those are helpful examples. The conversation not too long ago with with Marty Alvarado, the executive vice chancellor at the community college system, she was saying as challenging as the pandemic has been for everybody, one of the best things to come out of it is this the level of innovation that's happening at the campus level among faculty and leaders, across the whole system, and the willingness of people to just sort of throw out the rule book to some extent, or like push away the chains of bureaucracy and say, no, we're just going to do what we have to do for students, rules be damned. And so she was saying, I hope people hang on to that spirit of collaboration, that spirit of innovation, even once we are back in the classroom and everything. So yeah, those are helpful examples. I just want to note, I do see we're getting questions here in the chat. Alice is capturing these. So we'll, after we hear from Robert, we'll loop back around to some of these because there's some interesting conversation happening there. But Robert, there's a lot of the initiatives that we're talking about today are really focused on, CTE and career pathways, but cross-sector partnerships and regional leadership can really be applied to any number of different initiatives or content areas. So what are some of the ways that you've been applying, cross-sector regional leadership skills and mindsets to your work at Fresno City College?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us today. It's a real honor to be here today. So just the conversation has been around CTE, and even here, for the most part, we've been talking a lot about career technical education and how to expand those opportunities. And that's been the focus of the regional work that we've been doing for many years. When I got here, we were doing dual enrollment programs, and primarily it was around career technical education. But my goal was I always have goals that are really hard to achieve. So I decided that it was time to go into the GE sector. And with unions and everything else, it's a little bit difficult. But I knew that we could make a difference and start doing some of that work. For those of you that are not familiar, the Fresno has this project called the Drive Initiative, and it stands for Developing the Region's Inclusive and Vibrant Economy. We knew that the region had some problems, but we didn't know how serious they were until they started pulling some data, and they're pretty serious. We're ranked 59th in racial inclusion, economic inclusion from the 59 largest cities. We're last in the nation. We're 263 out of 274. So we're doing very poorly in that area. So one of the areas that we decided to push was dual enrollment. We saw it as an equity initiative. So we really started to switch and start looking at ways to improve the collaboration with the partners with Fresno Unified, Central, Washington Union, the larger school districts here, and trying to see how we could offer GE classes, because we know that we need to have more bachelor's degrees in order to attract business. Business won't come and they won't stay if you don't have a skilled workforce, right? So in order to attract those bigger paying jobs, those better paying jobs, you have to have people with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and PhDs. So that's kind of the area that the Drive Initiative, through the data that they ran, that's an area of focus, and it's primarily in STEM and accounting and areas in business and stuff like that. So we decided that we were going to put some money into that. Together, from that initiative, there was another initiative that came out. It's called the K-16 Collaborative. And that's the leadership from all of the different systems of education here in the Central Valley. So you have superintendents and presidents and the chancellors from the different educational institutions, from UC Merced all the way down to Washington Union. So when we started getting together and started getting that buy-in from the top leadership, then we really started to gain some traction and make some differences. I run the accounting, so we know that there's a need for accountants and they're well-paying jobs. So that's one of the projects that was assigned to Fresno City to lead. Reedley College is leading engineering, so they are trying to expand opportunities in STEM. Big controversies there with the faculty, because depending on who you talk to, they'll define engineering differently. So in CTE, we see applied manufacturing being some type of engineering. And then you start looking at what is the real engineering, so theory and stuff like that. So once you start getting into those conversations, it starts getting really interesting. So we've been doing that work. And another project that I started regionalizing is equity. How do we achieve equity and really eliminate barriers for students? That's a really hard task, but what is it that we need to do to change those mindsets? I heard earlier somebody mentioned that change comes from people changing their minds, and that's what we are trying to do. So one of the things that we've decided to do is regionalize our equity work. Universities, private institutions, and K-12s, they don't have specific funding for equity work like the community colleges do. So we decided to set some of this money aside to bring them on board and do some of the work that we're doing. We're doing some of the Cora training. If you're not familiar with that, those are trainings on racial microaggressions, unconscious bias, how do you teach men of color, and then how do you teach boys of color in the K-16 in the K-12 system. We have interdisciplinary faculty equity labs. So really teaching faculty how to work with the students from marginalized communities that we serve. At Fresno City, we are right in the center of the most impoverished area in Fresno County, probably. So we have to look at how do we teach our students and really be fair to the students that we serve. So we're trying to expand that work, and we're trying to expand that work to the universities. One of the projects that I forgot to mention is training teachers how to be college teachers from the K-12 system, because we want them to teach our dual enrollment classes. So I actually convinced the universities to add these faculty equity labs into that training at the master's level at the university. And they're including some of the Cora trainings as well. So these teachers that are graduating with a master's degree that are already teachers, they're graduating with that knowledge already, so that we're producing teachers that really understand how to work with the marginalized communities that we work. It's a very neat project. We're really looking forward to some outcomes. This is not something that will change tomorrow or in a month. It's going to take some time, because when you start changing mindsets, it takes a little bit of time to see some of the results. But I think we're starting to see some awesome results here at Fresno City. And I think as we change the mindset of the faculty and the people that work in education across the region, we'll begin to see some more positive outcomes.
Absolutely. Anna made a point here in the chat that I wonder if we can get your thoughts on about, how are you seeing equity strategy as an economic development strategy?
Research shows that if an area isn't inclusive of the community, they're not really doing well economically. So that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to close those gaps so that everybody sees it. So the DRIVE initiative is focused around economic development, human capital, and neighborhood development. Those are all areas that we need to be more inclusive in. So we're educators, so we have to close the gaps in education. But if we start regionalizing that work and really start looking at other areas, people will start getting on board and really start educating the rest of the region on how to become more inclusive.
Awesome. Great. So we have there were some questions that came through. We'll go back a little bit. Diane, I think you had a question earlier for Joy around employers' roles in some of the work you're doing. Diane, do you want to ask your question? Maybe we lost Diane.
It was Deb then.
Oh, was it Deb? Oh, yeah, about that. I wrote Diane. Deb.
Yes, I'm really curious, and Robert, I thought that was fabulous. How much are employers in at design of curriculum, hands-on internships, apprenticeships, working in and out of the classroom, and then funding? Because to me, I think that integration of economic and human development is the tipping point. If we can help everybody understand it's both and, I just think we're unstoppable.
Right. So I think you asked that question to me, right, Deb?
Well, I asked it to Joy, but I'd love to hear your response.
Oh.
You're right here in.
Well, I'll let Joy answer first, and then I'll chime in right after her. I thought you said Robert. Sorry.
Sure. Just really quickly, it's such a great question, and it's a really incredible insight that you share. And I think there's just a lot of improvement to be done in that area. However, I mean, in terms of quantity, not quality, we've had about $5.2 million of in-kind time donated in our region for work-based learning experiences. However, the quality does vary. I think that Lori Morton is actually on the call, and she is extremely instrumental in bringing employers and post-secondary partners to the table to talk about curriculum by industry sector. We have industry sector collaboratives, conversations, and summits. So there's a lot of work to be done. It's a focus of ours. It's been a focus of many of our collaborative projects too. I really appreciate your insight.
Okay, so I'll chime in, Deb. So just so we do include employers in all of the planning for curriculum, especially in career technical education. They are heavily involved when we develop curriculum, and we continue to include them as we update curriculum every year. One of the areas that I'm finding that where we don't really include employers is in the areas of the general education. So more on the like engineering and business and stuff like that. And one would argue that everything is career education, and we probably should. And right now, with as I was talking about earlier, in engineering, we're finding that conversation is very important to include employers, because employers will naturally tell you, engineers, for example, they should know how to weld. They should know how to identify what type of weld the equipment needs, or equipment that needs to be replaced, they should be able to identify all that instead of just knowing the theory behind it. So, in many areas, we probably should include employers, but in some areas we don't. So I think that's a really good point that you're making.
There was another question from Carlos, I think, to Rock about how to institutionalize some of these initiatives. Carlos?
Carlos had to step away for a moment, but
Just kidding.
he was just interested in learning more how some of what you've discussed would be institutionalized or move forward, so it's not just dependent on a particular grant.
Yeah, just I think there's huge benefit to the investments that the state is making through the Strong Workforce Program and also the EWD funds in kind of creating this regional infrastructure that consists of these regional directors and also K-12 pathway coordinators. So in our region, we've got 14 regional directors and 18 pathway coordinators. And that, so far seems like it's ongoing funding that I think the state is increasingly seeing that as part of just the basic investment in education. And that enables us to, I think, be thinking longer term. So the kinds of convening that we're doing on an ongoing basis. It's not really a one-off, and it's not driven by any particular grant. And what we're finding is that I think in that people really appreciate the opportunity to join together periodically with people who are facing the same kinds of challenges and can share practices and begin to explore ways in which they can work together. And that often then moves to those regional joint ventures, some of which now have been going on for 4 or 5 years, and colleges are starting to invest in them directly because they are clearly sort of better investments for them than what they might make locally because they get a better ROI on it.
Yeah. Just reading through the chat here. Yeah, I was gonna say, Anna, did you want to say something about the governor's budget and what you think that means for some of this work?
Yeah, I think, where my head goes to is a lot of what we talked about, again, back in 2016, where we were looking at, those 5 elements of systems change. And we were like, policy comes down and shifts, right? Power and resources, right? Investments come down. And then what I thought was really interesting from what I was learning from all of you were really the other 3, the hard ones that keep coming up, the mindsets, the values, the new skills and behaviors and things that will actually make those policy and investments real, right? And when I say real, it's really aligned to the systems and the work that you're all building in your regions, in your communities, with your partners. So, one of the biggest things that I took away was, I think, where Joy started us off with this idea of, how do we move from a collection of kind of grants and kind of grant funded collaborations to kind of, more strategic. This is the impact we're trying to have, and this is how we're directing these resources that are coming to us in order to advance that. So, I immediately was like, oh, is it 2016 again, but with a pandemic, when I saw the governor's budget, because it was a lot of incentives for public-private partnerships, for cross-sector partnerships, 248 million strong workforce program. We have, K through 14, there's like a slew of apprenticeship and CTE initiatives. And I just kept coming back to what I learned from, the good folks in Tulare Kings, which is, how do you now make sure, what are the levers that we have to funnel those investments to the kind of equity-oriented systems that you have all been building? And that, to me, is, I think, the place I start with when I look at things like that. And I think, okay, well, how are you guys taking that on? So as we think about kind of what's coming next, especially since you all just laid out kind of this is what our work is, this is how we're approaching it, and there's so many through lines in how you're all approaching it, despite the different places that you're at. You know, how are you guys seeing these investments? How are you thinking about them kind of with that? And now I'm kind of branding it, Joy, that TK mindset of moving from grant funded to really impact orientation.
You know, I do think there's a sea change in how the funding is flowing in strong workforce, that it is moving away from sort of grant initiatives where somebody in the chancellor's office or elsewhere decides this is going to be the area of focus, to one of here's some money, build capacity. We want to see what your outcomes are, and what we're really focused on is not activities but outcomes. And the funding is sort of ongoing. It's not something that we're having to compete for each year. There's some always sort of wanting to ensure that it continues, but you know, I think that for us, it's really we're thinking about it much differently than we did before. And one thing we haven't talked about that I think is a critical element is data, and how to use data in ways that sort of inform and motivate that. I would. One thing I'm curious about to explore at some point is we've been experimenting with utilizing data to show, you know, we created this tool using what's in Launchboard to allow a college or a region to look at here's the portfolio of programs, how are those programs performing, and with respect to each other, and then to be able to take one particular program and say, how is this program performing compared to every other program in the region of the same type. One thing that we have found in our sort of initial experiments with that is that when you make that kind of information available, there's a sort of bar raising phenomenon that goes on. People see, somebody else is doing substantially better at this. Maybe I ought to pay attention to them. And it's, you know, there's both a sort of carrot and stick thing there of here I can learn something, and that's sort of what we try to focus on. But also there's an increased sense of accountability of, you know, they're doing better. I ought to also sort of up my game here. And I'm sort of curious whether others are using that kind of comparative data in ways that seems to help motivate and inform movement in the right direction.
Rock, this is Joy, and I just, you know, I wanted to chime in. Data is really something that we've been improving on in the last year. And what we've tried to do is to highlight data from perhaps, you know, like a K-12, what percentage of your students are considered prepared? And a district will host a webinar, and so many people jump on the call because they want to understand how that was achieved and what steps occurred, and then they look at their own data. I think there's a lot of different examples, but that's one that comes to mind. And I think regional data is hard to get, and as regions on the call, we need to continue to seek that. We're trying to work with Educational Results Partnership on an educational productivity model that starts really early on and through the workforce. And, you know, let's all stay in conversation about that. It's very critical.
Absolutely.
I did put a link to our website that we've created, metrics.strongworkforce.net. It is data for the state. You can look at it by region. What you'll get to is a sort of a landing page that then takes you to different, and it's still very much a prototype, so apologize for the rough edges, but.
Great. No, I mean, that's a really good question. You make a really good point about the data pieces. And I think what I'm realizing as part of this conversation is that this is, you know, it was great to have everybody back together, but I think it's really just a starter conversation. There are a lot of different angles and entry points I think we have here that we can for sure continue this conversation. So with that, maybe I'll actually go ahead and share, we can share with you some ideas that we have that we'd love for you all to be involved with. First, we'll share a recent video that we created about our efforts, JFF's efforts around inclusive regional economic development. I think what's interesting here is the evolution of our thinking, our strategy, our work at JFF has been significantly informed by our relationships with you all and the regional work that you all have been doing. And so this video speaks to some of that.
You're probably hearing a lot about the economy lately, about how COVID-19 is exacerbating the inequalities some communities have been facing. As the nation pushes toward recovery, we cannot afford to return to the status quo. Now is the time to focus on inclusive economic development, the creation of an equitable and resilient economy that everyone can contribute to and benefit from, no matter who you are or where you live. We at JFF believe that in order for regions to recover from the current crisis and decades of unequal investment and discrimination, we must authentically engage diverse communities in regional planning and decision-making. Through the Future Ready California Network, we are leading the conversation and learning what it really takes to build an inclusive economy. What could it look like? What might it take?
I think it's important that we kind of develop these policies that are inclusive to populations that have been historically marginalized.
By upskilling even that small employer to have the tools that they need to grow, that really can shift and change local economy.
Who needs to be involved?
Business, labor, community often have different interests. But it's about bringing together people that you have some conflicts with.
When people begin to really unpack racial injustice and systemic racism, and when people are able to come with different perspectives to a table and go to the root cause of how did we get here in the first place, and what are some of the things that we definitely need to do to make sure that we're turning this situation in a different direction.
The Future Ready California Network is committed to driving a path forward, to build an economy that works for all, but we can't do it without you. Join the conversation today.
Thanks, Ichiro. So that's what we're up to. We are, reaching out to you all and other members of the Future Ready Network to understand what are the issues that you're interested in, what are the challenges that you're facing, and how can your peers who are part of the network support. Thanks, Kim. We like that video too. Brand new. How can we all work together on some of these big issues and these big questions? Anna, did you want to add anything else about Future Ready or some of our recent thinking?
Well, I think, part of what we learned in the work with you all that I'll just name is the big push and orientation and how much the systems leadership frame really resonated, I think, throughout the different collaborations. And it's something we used when we worked with the Fresno Region College Pipeline, and kind of how I met Deb and Robert and the whole Fresno Region crew. And a lot of what we kept hearing over and over again, whether the collaborations were focused on, career technical education as the lead, or college and career pathways, or, even, community engagement for higher education success, right? And all of these different collaborations, I think the big ambition that unified everybody was this idea of regional prosperity. Is what you were all really pushing for was transforming your communities and building the systems that were going to get you there. And I think for us at JFF, we've really been thinking about how do we support you all doing that? What are the things that are now front of mind? What are the things that we need to keep going back to? So a lot of our work has been in really doing that deep dive, and how do we help grow the economy in a way that more people can benefit from it? And to us, it was really grounded in what we learned from all of you and from all of our work with you, and and plus, because of all the different systems that we get an opportunity to work on. So that was kind of it from our end, but I'm really curious kind of how you are seeing your work now. I mean, I think we definitely went through those questions, but, you know, looking at just the video, looking at idea, and, you know, which just captures a snapshot of what we learned and how we're thinking about this work. But this is really, you know, what would you like us to take away from this conversation, from kind of the opportunities that you've all been talking about? And I'll kind of shut myself up there because I'm really, really curious to get a sense from you all where you're at there.
I'll say something. I think sometimes we are competitive by nature, and we want to do better than our partners. You know, especially in education. You know, Fresno City College serves 40,000 students, so we're always telling our little brothers and sisters around us we're much bigger. We get the bigger piece of the pie or whatever. But I think it's on us to really examine the work that we're doing and really leave the competition aside sometimes and really uh, bring people together. And if Fresno City College, for example, has the bulk of the resources, let's share those resources so that others could continue to do the work. And I would encourage everybody, wherever you're at, you know, if you have something that you think is valuable for everybody else, share with people. You know, we are constantly sharing best practices with each other. And I think we've developed a culture here locally where we continue to share just the things that are working, just simply because we're here for students. And if it wasn't for students, you know, and community college, the word community is in that. So we want to make sure that we are here for the community, and we can't do it if we're trying to compete with each other and trying to be better than each other.
Really good point. I think especially in these particular times, right? Competition won't necessarily serve us, right? In the same way that collaboration will.
And I'm just going to sort of echo that. And I think that's the strength when I look at everyone around this table, that's the strength of why things are working well. I think we've learned how to collaborate in new and different ways and sort of be able to give up that fear of it's about me, but it's really about us. And how do we, you know, sort of that rising tide lifts all boats. But I absolutely agree wholeheartedly. And I think there are things I've heard today that are happening in the Bay Area and that are happening in Fresno that absolutely can connect to the work that we're doing in the Coachella Valley. And I would love to be able to have follow-up conversations about that, because I think we strengthen all of the different sub pieces, and California just emerges that much stronger in all of our students. So I appreciate this collaborative, this network, and people's willingness to share and to partner in new and different and long distance ways.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that might be a good note for us to close on, Kim. Thank you. We can always rely on Kim. I do want to thank our panelists once again, Rock, Joy, Deb, Robert. Thank you so much for your perspectives on these questions. Thank you to this whole group of participants for your contributions and questions to the conversation. Thanks to our JFF colleagues here. This is, like I said, this is just a start. I think we'll create some more opportunities to bring groups like this together. I also like this size. It's like kind of 20 to 25 person is a good size. So, you know, some lessons learned for us is it's really important that we continue to engage these folks. And if we can help find opportunities to bring you all together, then we definitely will. So thank you all. I hope everybody has a good afternoon, and stay tuned for some interesting things that will be coming down the pike soon.
Thank you.